Welcome to Books in Brief, where we explore the key ideas of great books and how to understand them in everyday life. We're constantly told that to succeed or, to finally overcome our bad habits and reach our full potential, we just need more willpower.
Right, exactly. We're always told we need more self-discipline.
Yeah, society tells us to push through the resistance, conquer our inner demons, and basically white-knuckle our way through life. But what if fighting against our own minds is exactly why we feel so exhausted and stuck in the first place?
Well, that's the central dilemma we're tackling today, and it really shifts how you look at your own brain. It's just utterly exhausting to be at war with yourself.
It really is.
When we rely solely on willpower to suppress our unwanted urges or to numb our difficult emotions, we kind of end up treating our inner landscape like a battlefield. And the ultimate casualty in that war isn't just our bad habits, it's our own well-being and our baseline sense of inner peace.
Right. And today we are exploring a radically different approach to our inner lives. It comes from no bad parts. Healing Trauma and Restoring Wholeness with the Internal Family Systems Model by Richard C. Schwartz, PhD.
That's a fantastic deep dive for us today.
It really is. This approach takes everything we have been taught about self-control, discipline, and even human nature and just flips it completely upside down.
It really does. Our mission today is to help you dismantle a massive centuries-old cultural myth. That is the myth that you have a single unified mind.
Which is such a deeply ingrained idea.
Exactly. Instead of that, we're going to map out the hidden inner parts that are actually driving your daily behavior. And ultimately, we're going to talk about how to uncover your core, undamaged self, which is the only thing that actually has the power to heal your inner world from the inside out.
To understand how to heal, we first have to unlearn that fundamental misconception about how the human brain is structured. The book calls this the mono-mind paradigm.
Yes, the mono-mind paradigm is this incredibly widespread, culturally ingrained belief that we just have one singular unitary mind. Think about the implications of that.
It creates a lot of shame, doesn't it?
A tremendous amount. Because of this belief, when we experience conflicting urges, like desperately wanting to stick to a diet but also having an overwhelming urge to eat a whole cake, we feel like we're losing our minds.
Oh, absolutely.
Or when we have passing thoughts that society deems disturbing, we immediately view those thoughts as pathological. We see them as deep flaws in our character. The logic is brutal. If you have just one mind and that mind produces a destructive urge, then you must be fundamentally broken.
Exactly. And, this isn't some new modern anxiety either. The book traces this all the way back to historical doctrines like total depravity that basically suggested human nature is inherently sinful and needs constant policing.
Right, it's a very old fear.
Yeah. And today, that same underlying fear is reinforced by a modern cutthroat culture that tells us we must dominate our weaknesses to survive in the marketplace.
That cultural backdrop is exactly why we rely so heavily on willpower. We are essentially taught to manhandle our own unruly thoughts. We just think the only way to be a good, productive person is to suppress the bad parts of ourselves.
But here's why I want to push back on what society teaches us. We worship willpower. We applaud people who can force themselves to do things they hate.
We really do.
What do you think? Doesn't trying to forcefully exile our bad habits just turn us into our own worst enemies? Functionally, what is actually happening in our brains when we try to just willpower our way out of a bad habit?
Well, that's the real trap of willpower. When you rely exclusively on forced self-discipline, you aren't actually conquering yourself. You are just recruiting one part of yourself to attack another part.
Wow, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, society highly encourages us to develop this rigid, tyrannical inner drill sergeant. This becomes the nasty inner critic we all know so well, the voice telling you you're lazy or worthless if you don't succeed. But the core problem is that parts are like people.
Meaning they don't like being bullied.
Exactly. The harder you try to shame them, ignore them, or exile them, the stronger they fight back.
So if I try to forcefully suppress a part of me that wants to procrastinate or binge eat, it doesn't just evaporate. It just goes into hiding and waits for a moment when I'm tired or stressed to break out with even more force.
Precisely, and that creates a terrible, exhausting cycle. You suppress the urge, it explodes later when your guard is down, and then your inner critic viciously attacks you for failing.
Which just makes you feel worse.
Right, and the resulting shame makes the urge to escape even stronger the next time. You are left completely drained, having to constantly police your own mind. It is a totally unsustainable way to navigate life.
Okay, so if the mono mind is a myth and we shouldn't just be policing ourselves, what exactly is going on inside our heads? If I'm not one unified mind, what am I?
The book offers a fascinating map of our inner ecosystem, and it all starts with the concept of multiplicity.
Not-
Yeah, multiplicity is the idea that it is entirely normal and actually incredibly healthy to have multiple sub-personalities. The book calls these parts. We are all born with these distinct inner beings interacting inside of us.
So it's not a disorder?
Not at all. Having parts is not a sign of illness, like multiple personality disorder. It's just the natural architecture of the human mind. However, when we experience trauma or severe chronic stress, these parts get forced out of their natural states and into extreme roles.
Let's ground this in a relatable everyday scenario so we can actually see these parts in action. Let's say you're at work and your boss suddenly sends you a vague email that just says, "We need to talk in my office right now."
Oh, the dreaded email.
Exactly. What happens inside the mind of someone whose system has been pushed into these extreme roles?
That's a perfect example. The book categorizes these extreme roles into three main groups. When you get that email, the first group that gets hit are the exiles.
The exiles. Got it.
Yeah. Exiles are the young, vulnerable parts of us that carry the pain, terror, or feelings of worthlessness from past injuries. In the case of the email, your exile is the part of you that suddenly feels like a terrified 5-year-old, convinced you are about to be abandoned, fired, and left homeless.
Oh man, I know that feeling. We desperately try to lock these exiles away in a dark room because feeling their raw pain is just too overwhelming.
Right, my heart drops into my stomach, the exile is screaming, but I don't just sit there and cry at my desk. Something else takes over to keep me functioning.
Exactly. Because we lock away the exiles, other parts have to step up to keep them contained and keep you functioning. These are the managers.
Okay, what do the managers do?
Managers are your proactive protectors. They try to control your life, your relationships, and your environment to prevent the exiles from ever getting triggered in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense.
So, getting back to the email, your manager is the part of you that instantly scrambles to draft 3 different apologies, mentally reviews every mistake you've made in the last 6 months, and tries to perfectly control the upcoming conversation so you don't get hurt.
Ah, so your inner perfectionist, your inner critic, or the part of you that constantly people pleases to avoid conflict, those are all managers working overtime. They just want to keep the world safe so the exiles don't have to feel pain.
You've got it. They're trying to proactively manage the world.
But managers are bound to fail eventually, right? You can't control the world perfectly. Your boss might still yell at you despite your apologies. So what happens when a trigger slips past the perfectionist manager and hits that raw exile anyway?
That is when the third category steps in. The book calls these the firefighters.
Firefighter.
Yeah, so the reactive protectors, they don't plan ahead like managers. They rush in after the fact when the managers have failed and the exiles are flooded with unbearable pain.
Oh,
Firefighters use extreme measures to numb that pain at all costs, and they do not care about the collateral damage to your life.
not at all. A firefighter's only goal is to put out the emotional fire of the exile. So if you go into that meeting and get reprimanded, your exile's pain of worthlessness might flare up. The firefighter will step in to shut it down.
How does that usually look in real life?
This is where you see behaviors like leaving the office and binge drinking, mindlessly doom scrolling for 5 hours, flying into uncontrollable road rage on the way home, or completely dissociating.
Wait, so even the part of me that mindlessly scrolls for hours or suddenly lashes out in anger is actually trying to help me? That's an important point, but it's hard to swallow.
I know, it's definitely a massive paradigm shift. It goes against everything we assume about self-destructive behavior.
It really does. From the outside, those behaviors look like they are actively destroying my life, not saving it.
Right. But to illustrate how deeply true this is, the book shares a very powerful clinical example. The author was working with a client who had a part that made her physically cut her own face.
Oh, wow. That is incredibly intense.
Yes. Now, from a traditional medical standpoint, that is pure pathology. It's severe self-destruction, and the standard protocol would be to immediately medicate it away or lock the patient up. But instead of fighting it, the author got genuinely curious and tried talking to the part.
How on earth did he find a protective intention in someone cutting their own face?
He asked the cutting part directly why it was doing this. Because he approached it with respect instead of fear, the part actually answered.
Why did it say?
It revealed that it was completely frozen in the past during a time of horrific, ongoing childhood abuse. The part explained that it was heroically trying to get the client out of her body, literally creating physical pain to distract from emotional agony so she could survive the trauma.
It is heartbreaking.
It really is. It also had to constantly control the client's rage. If the client had shown rage as a child, it would have resulted in even worse abuse from the perpetrator. The part didn't realize the client was an adult now. It was still acting as if the abuse was happening today.
That is incredibly profound. It wasn't a monster. It was a savior, trapped in a horrible time loop.
Exactly. And this brings us to the absolute core rule of the book, which actually gives the book its title. There are literally no bad parts.
Even the really extreme ones.
Yes, even the most destructive, terrifying, extreme parts have deeply protective intentions. They are essentially inner children who have been forced into terrible, stressful jobs to keep the psychological system surviving.
But that raises a massive question for me. If all our parts have these fundamentally good intentions, why do they cause so much chaos in our current lives?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah, like why do they stay so extreme even after the trauma has passed? This actually brings to mind a brilliant analogy from the book that really helped it click for me.
Which one?
The book says parts are like perfectly good computer programs or hardware that have been hijacked by a foreign virus.
I love that analogy. It's the perfect way to visualize it. The book calls this virus a burden. Burdens are extreme beliefs, emotions, or energies that literally attach to our parts during traumas or severe attachment injuries. So, the hardware, the part itself, is pure, valuable, and good. But the malware, the burden it's forced to carry, is toxic and makes the program behave erratically.
For example, an exile might carry the burden of the belief, I am fundamentally worthless, which it absorbed like malware from a highly critical parent.
That's a great example.
Or a manager might carry the burden of the belief that the world is incredibly dangerous and people will always betray me. So it thinks I must control every tiny detail to stay safe.
Yes, and those are what the book calls personal burdens stemming from your own direct life experiences. But the book also dives into legacy burdens, which are fascinating.
Legacy burdens.
Yeah, these are viruses we inherit across generations from our ancestors or absorb directly from the water we swim in, basically our culture. Things like systemic racism, patriarchy, toxic individualism, or extreme materialism.
How do legacy burdens specifically affect our parts?
Well, take toxic individualism. If you absorb that legacy burden from our culture, it silently reorganizes your internal system. It forces your manager parts to believe that you must do everything alone and that needing help is a sign of weakness.
Oh, I see how that plays out.
Right, so your managers work themselves to death and they ruthlessly shame your vulnerable exiles anytime they crave connection or support. The parts themselves aren't the problem. The cultural malware is.
So the crucial takeaway for the listener here is that you are not your burden. The parts are entirely separate from the viruses they carry.
That is a vital point.
An addict part isn't inherently an addict. It's just a sacred inner being that's currently carrying a massive, crushing burden of responsibility to keep you from feeling an unbearable emotional pain. Once you separate the part from the burden, you completely change how you treat yourself.
That is the exact distinction we have to make to begin healing.
Okay, so let's push this computer analogy a little further. If our parts are all essentially parentified children running wild, trying to manage these heavy viruses, who is actually supposed to be the adult in the room?
Good question.
If the parts are the software programs, who is the operating system? Who is the user?
That leads us to the most profound and hopeful discovery detailed in the book. The adult in the room, the core operating system, is what the book simply calls the self.
The self. And the book is very clear that the self is not just another part.
Right.
It's something else entirely.
Right. The self is an innate, undamaged spiritual essence that is present at the core of every single person. It does not matter how much trauma you have endured, how awful your firefighters have been, or how heavy your burdens are. The self cannot be damaged.
That is so encouraging.
It really is. It also doesn't need to be developed or built up over time like a muscle at the gym. It only needs to be uncovered. It's always there waiting.
That leads perfectly into the book's solar eclipse analogy.
Yeah.
The book points out that you don't fight the moon to see the sun. When our protective parts get triggered, they overwhelm us. In the book's terminology, they blend with us. They obscure the self entirely, much like the moon blocking the sun during a solar eclipse.
That's such a beautiful way to describe it.
When we are blended, we genuinely believe we are the angry part, or we are the terrified part. We lose all our perspective. But the sun, the self, is always still there, shining right behind the moon. So how do we move the moon out of the way? How do we access this self?
We do it through a process called unblending. Unblending is the core mechanism of healing in this model. It's conceptually simple, though it takes practice.
How does it work?
It starts by noticing a feeling, say a tight, buzzing knot of anxiety in your chest. Instead of trying to force it away with willpower, you acknowledge its protective intention and you gently ask it if it would be willing to step back and give you a little space.
Okay, I have to admit, that sounds a little bit like magic. You just ask the anxiety to step back. Why does that actually work on a psychological level?
It works because of a concept called cognitive diffusion. When you are blended, your language is, I am angry, or I am anxious. Your amygdala is firing, and you are entirely caught in the emotional storm.
You are just in it.
Exactly. But the moment you pause and say, a part of me feels anxious, you create a literal neurological space. You shift the brain's activity away from the alarm center of the amygdala, and you engage the prefrontal cortex, which is where the self operates.
Oh, that is fascinating.
You become the observer of the feeling rather than being the feeling itself.
That makes so much sense. You're changing your literal relationship to the emotion. And when parts trust you enough to unblend and step back, that space opens up inside.
Yes, and in that newly opened space, the self spontaneously emerges. You don't have to force it or manufacture it. When the self is present, it's easily recognizable because it's characterized by what the book calls the 8 C's.
Oh, I remember these.
Mhm.
Curiosity, calm, confidence, compassion, creativity, clarity, courage, and connectedness.
Perfect memory.
I love the 8 C's because they serve as such a clear, practical checklist for the listener. You can use it as a diagnostic tool in real time.
How so?
Well, if you're looking at your own inner anxiety and you feel frustrated with it or you just want to fix it, you are not in self. You're just blended with a different manager part that finds the anxiety annoying.
That happens all the time.
But if you can look at that anxiety and feel genuine curiosity and compassion toward it, then you know you are anchored in your core self.
Exactly. The self acts as the ultimate compassionate inner parent. It knows exactly how to heal the system. Once the self is leading, it can finally listen to the exiles, witness their past pain without getting overwhelmed by it, and help them release their toxic burdens.
And what happens to those extreme protectors, like the perfectionist managers and the destructive firefighters, when the exiles they've been protecting are finally unburdened and healed? Do we just get rid of them?
No, because remember, there are no bad parts. We don't want to get rid of them.
Right, of course.
That's the most beautiful part of this process. Once the exiles are healed and no longer carrying that intense pain, the extreme protectors realize they are basically out of a job. They look around and see there's no more fire to fight.
So they can finally relax.
Yes, they voluntarily transform. They drop their extreme roles and revert to their natural, valuable states. A harsh, abusive inner critic might transform into an encouraging inner cheerleader.
That is a huge shift.
Or a hypervigilant manager might become a wise advisor who helps you set healthy boundaries. They finally get to do the positive jobs they were actually designed for.
This inner transformation is incredible, but the book makes a very compelling case that this doesn't stay trapped inside our own heads. Healing our inner family radically alters how we interact with the rest of humanity in the real world.
It absolutely has to, because our external relationships are always a direct mirror of our internal ones. Think about it. If you have an inner drill sergeant that absolutely despises your own vulnerable, scared exiles, how are you going to react when your partner or a friend or even a stranger shows vulnerability or neediness?
You're going to judge them harshly. You probably attack them or pull away because their external vulnerability triggers your own hidden, unhealed pain. You treat them exactly how your manager treats your own exile.
Exactly. But when you are led by the self, you gain a sort of psychological X-ray vision. You stop totalizing people.
What do you mean by totalizing?
You stop seeing them as just their prickly, angry, or defensive protectors. Instead, you can look past those aggressive outer defenses and begin to see the frightened, burdened exiles that are pulling the strings underneath.
That connects perfectly to the concept of tormentors from the book. It's a great play on words.
I really like that one.
The idea is that the people who trigger us the most in life, the ones who really torment us, are actually mentoring us. They're showing us exactly which of our own exiles still need healing.
That is such a powerful reframe.
It is. If someone makes a passing criticism and it sends you into a total spiral of rage, that person is acting as a tormentor. They are just pointing a giant spotlight at an unhealed wound of worthlessness that you still need to address.
They are literally handing you the curriculum for your own growth. And if we zoom out and connect this to the bigger picture, the implications are massive.
How so?
The book argues that many of our global crises, from climate change to extreme economic inequality to political polarization, are ultimately driven by a severe lack of self-leadership on a macro scale.
Wait, how does the internal family systems model apply to entire countries or systems?
Because institutions are just collections of human systems. We have entire countries, megacorporations, and political movements operating from burdened, protective parts.
That makes total sense when you look at the news.
Right. They are driven by extreme managers focused entirely on greed, endless growth, and hypercompetition to stockpile resources against perceived threats. Or they are driven by firefighters causing mass destruction to numb collective cultural pain.
So it's the exact same dynamic, just scaled up.
Exactly. When we heal our individual inner systems, we aren't just doing navel-gazing self-help. We are contributing to a critical mass of self-energy. And the book suggests that this critical mass of compassionate, clear, connected self-energy is exactly what is required to heal the planet.
So to sum up our journey today, if we want to find peace, we have to fundamentally drop the myth of the monomind.
Absolutely.
We must stop going to war with our own protective parts through forced willpower and shame, because that just recruits parts to fight other parts. Instead, we need to unblend from our protectors, create some cognitive space, and uncover the 8 C's of our core self.
That's the perfect summary.
And finally, we use that inherent compassion to unburden our exiles, which naturally transforms our protectors and ultimately changes how we relate to the entire world around us.
It is a profound shift from seeing yourself as a broken, sinful machine that constantly needs fixing to seeing yourself as a divided family that just needs loving leadership. So I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
The next time you feel a wave of overwhelming anxiety, a sudden spike of irrational anger, or the intense urge to numb out and distract yourself, don't try to banish it. Don't tell it to go away. Instead, pause, turn toward that feeling with genuine curiosity, and gently ask it, what are you trying to protect me from? Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this brief exploration of the book, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future episodes. New book insights are coming soon. See you next time.